Welcome back to Missing. I am Tim, here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic today, Tim. The person who we are speaking with today is a reoccurring guest. He's been on so many times. He might as well be credited as a co-host at this point. He is someone who brings a really unique perspective to this field that you and I are in, this true crime media podcasting industry. He's got a really unique perspective. He's a super smart guy. I feel like every time we speak to him, you and I get just a little bit smarter, which to his credit goes a long way.
Yes. And this is Dr. David Perlmutter from Texas Tech University. He's a professor and former dean of the College of Media down there in Texas. And he's a great hang. He's great to speak with about crime and media, and that's what he teaches his students. And so it's always fun to speak with David Perlmutter on The Missing Show because we break down some of these mysteries and how the media has covered them.
Yeah, he sort of sets the compass in a direction where you're not expecting to go. If you're speaking about two young women missing in another country, he'll direct that conversation down a path that you weren't expecting to go, and will really give you this, again, unique opportunity to see these stories from that perspective and pretty much bring it all full circle. There'll always be a mystery at the end, but at least you'll feel like some of the other ancillary pieces have been kind of tied together. And you'll get what I'm saying when you hear this conversation and when you hear the other conversations that we have with him.
Okay, everybody, thanks a lot for listening. Follow Missing on social media at MissingCSM. And we're going to take a quick break here, and we'll be right back with Dr. David Perlmutter. Dr. David Perlmutter, welcome back to the podcast. How are you today?
Very good, thank you. How are you folks?
You know, it's been a minute since Tim and I got together to do an interview for various reasons, but you, sir, are the first one that has graced this show with your presence after Tim and I have gone on a hiatus for a little while. So there's really no one better than Dr. David Perlmutter to join us today. And what a great topic that you've brought to the table. But although most people probably already know who you are because you've been on the show about 28 times, can you give our audience a little bit of a background on you?
Sure. And I guess we're going to talk about the mystery of your disappearance and some of the rumors and conspiracy theories about it too, right? At some point.
As long as it's in a responsible way.
There's some NDAs in place.
Okay. All right. We'll tease the audience with that. Hi, I'm David Perlmutter, and I'm a professor at the College of Media and Communication at Texas Tech University. And for the last 30 years or so, I've studied media, which, of course, the definition of that has changed over time. I was there when the internet began, did some early studies on things called websites, and then the evolution into the world of social media, and probably started out most famously, I wrote a book in 2008 called Blog Wars about the rise of social media in politics, and got on Jon Stewart's Daily Show. You can just search, and Jon Stewart was asking me these questions like, what is social media, and what kind of influence will it have on us? And to think that was only about 15 years ago, it shows you how far we've come with this dominance of all forms of social media now as the media almost, and everything else as an afterthought or an appendage.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for that. And so tell us about this topic that you sent to us today. You sent us an article that was headlined, "How TikTok Idiots and Wild Conspiracy Theories Are Disrupting Police Investigations." I guess if we can just start on why did you send this to us? Are you calling us TikTok idiots and wild conspiracy theorists?
No, I think when I had my first conversation on television at that time with Jon Stewart, he was asking me, is this good? Is this bad? And I think the answer I had in 2008 is the same, is that it depends. It depends on the situation of the event the crime. It depends on the circumstances, like we're talking about crime now, and then it also depends on the sources, the people who are the creators, and the situation, the police. We can't just have a one size fits all model. I have told you guys before that the reason that I love to come back here is that I do feel that you all are role models of responsibility. You're trying to get accuracy, you're trying to get facts, you ask tough questions the way the traditional journalists were supposed to do in the glory days of journalism. And you also have a lot of sensitivity that these are real people who've been hurt, either victims of crime or the sort of surrounding family and friends and so on. That this is not just an imaginary fantasy role-playing game here or crime cosplay, but this is reality. So I've always appreciated that. As you know, one of my first research projects was that I wrote a book about police and the media. This is even earlier than the web. I mean, literally, I wrote this book in the late 90s and just before the onset of the web becoming more and more popular. And it was called Policing the Media. And I wrote along with the police department, observed what police did, took photographs. It was what's called a visual ethnography. And I was interested in comparing what I saw and what I took pictures of with the media stereotypes of what police work was, which some of those stereotypes are still with us today, like the fact that the police can solve a crime in 43 minutes with commercials, or now streaming just 43 minutes, The violence was inherent in police work. The statistics are the average police officer may never fire his or her gun their entire career, let alone have a gun battle every Thursday night at 8 o'clock, the way it was in the old days of television. So even in the old days, there was a lot of mythology about crime and law enforcement. I guess we are rediscovering some of the old mythologies and we're creating new ones in this new age. And so there are TikTok idiots, to answer your question, but there are also a lot of people on social media who are doing good. I told you last time that I was interested in this phenomenon of inspirational influencers. And these might be people who are victims of crime. These might be people like who you've talked to who have a relative who suffered a crime and they're going on social media or they're using social media as therapy, as ways to process what happened, and also as a ways to get attention and maybe even a solution to their thing. So it's good or bad depending on the situations and who's the players.
Wow. Okay. I didn't have this question until you said that they're using this as a way to process and almost like a therapeutic method to get over their trauma. How does that work in the reverse, though? And maybe that's not the best way to put it, but how does that work from the consumer's intake of that information that person is putting out there for their own processing of their trauma? Doesn't that put their trauma on other people in a sense?
Well, of course, even today, you choose what media you want to ingest, right? So for most podcasts like yours, somebody has to physically download it or listen to it through their app or some other source. They have to subscribe. So we're not forcing any content on anyone, especially today where you have millions of choices. Obviously, a lot of people have chosen true crime as a genre of first download. It's extremely popular, and anything that's extremely popular is going to have negatives in one polarity and positives in other polarity. The article that I sent you was about a case, and I'm not going to add to the media frenzy by naming the case and all the details of the case, but basically, police were accusing social media content true crime creators of getting over involved in the case, as in showing up while the crime scene was still active, looking around themselves, possibly disturbing physical situations, over speculating with conspiracy theories, connecting dots that didn't exist in the first place. But if you read the whole article, it was interesting. There were also, and you've dealt with this in a lot of cases, Maura Murray being your first big case that this came up a lot. And I always take a neutral stance because of who I am. But there are always accusations the police aren't doing a perfect job either. So it's not this dichotomy of these crazy, stupid amateurs. In fact, there was a term used there, amateur sleuthing. Well, sometimes amateur sleuthing is superior to professional sleuthing. We've seen cases where the police just, for many reasons, including they were never used to dealing with a murderer before, or they didn't, somebody made a mistake on site, didn't interview, didn't ask the right questions. And this can happen in a country police department. It can happen in Boulder, some of the issues that went on with the JonBenet Ramsey killing. So I think, again, we have to look at each case individually. But in this instant, we're talking about how true crime people can do damage to a case and to a story and to people. And you've talked about that as an ancillary discussion in a lot of the cases that you've dealt with. You've brought up, this is why I love listening to you, is you keep bringing up the media role. Of course, media are never completely separate from any case. The Lindbergh kidnapping. We've always had media frenzies long before there was internet, social media.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did want to mention something about this article, not specifically the case, but what I found, the first thing, I guess, that I found very interesting was that the article started discussing a TikToker who's talking about the possibility of a serial killer in the UK. And then she goes on to connect these cases with maps, with various bodies of water, and they're women found in these bodies of water. And I mention that because this has been a thing in the U.S. for years already. If you Google smiley face killers, there's men in Boston that fall into the water, they drink, and then they fall in and drown, or sometimes they just go missing and are never found. This happens in Milwaukee. Lots of times it happens around cities that have water surrounding them, and I don't think that's a coincidence. So that was my first observation, was that it's the same story, just happening in a different country and with a different sex.
Right. And whenever we approach this, we have to ask the question, like, for example, human beings for thousands of years have founded their cities near bodies of water, because that's where water is. I'm sorry to sound like I'm being facetious here, but name me a city that's not associated with some kind of water. Obviously there's some probably cities in the desert that get well, but then people fell in the wells. So bodies of water and cities go together, and people who maybe for either through foul play or through different things, incapacity for one reason or another, bodies of water can be really dangerous. 3 inches of rain, a puddle can be, people drown, in buckets, in puddles, in swimming pools are the leading cause of death, I think, for one of the leading causes of death of young people, small children, there's a huge association between having a swimming pool and a small child and the death of that small child, right? So it probably isn't a conspiracy. It's just that it's a body of water and somebody's falls in and nobody's watching. So I always think that whenever we have a conspiracy theory, we have to ask, the usual question is that, are there other explanations that make sense more than a conspiracy? Then we flip it and we say, yeah, there are serial killers out there. We live in a world where there are serial killers. That's what these the profilers, the whole science of profiling is about. Hey, what is there a similarity between these cases? We know police, we've talked about this before, are very, very conservative, and you understand why, to declare something a serial killer. Because the moment you do that, then you're putting this imposition that every subsequent case you have to find a way to tie it to the previous one. And that can get in the way of a one-off, that has nothing to do with that. It can blind you. The worst. You've seen this before with a lot of cases. The worst thing that can happen is a theory. A theory can lead you to the solution, and a theory can blind you, right? A theory can help connect dots, and it can also put blinders on you so you don't see information which is very relevant. but it doesn't fit into the pattern that you want to have exist.
Okay, so that might kind of tie into this question that I wanted to ask. When you had mentioned in the beginning, or a few minutes ago, you had said that at times these citizen detectives, these citizen sleuths, might be better than the actual investigators. You said something to that effect, like sometimes they're better investigators. Is that because the actual investigators are maybe tied up with the procedure and the red tape of the whole, I don't know, system, the organization of policing? Or is it a combination of that and these people who aren't connected to law enforcement just might have more free time or more of an open mind? And does that tie into what you just said, which is, I guess, in essence, if you enter into an investigation with a preconceived notion, what do you do with that? How do you not enter into the investigation with a preconceived notion from both ends? I asked you like 15 questions in that one sentence, so good luck.
Well, let's go back to a previous show you did where you talked about the astonishing number of unsolved deaths. We won't necessarily call them all murders in the United States and Canada, like in the hundreds of thousands, right? So obviously, legal, normal governmental investigations don't always solve a crime. You would be out of business. I mean, you'd still do shows about, people found guilty, but there would be a lot less unsolved mystery shows if every mystery was, especially with crime, was solved. So we know the familiar pattern. We can watch a show like CSI, Boston, or I'm making that up, but you watch a CSI type show and you see, wow, all this amazing technology. You watch shows now where it's true, like, we could start going into the Moscow terrorist attack, and I don't know whether this is true or not, but I've heard Moscow is like the most cameraed city in the world per capita. There's more security cameras taking video of everybody doing everything in Moscow. I do not know the answer to that. I've heard that. I can believe it, that's possibly true, although I've heard London is very security camered up as well. I don't know about Boston, New England. But so, we have this mythology that the government has access to all this amazing technology, and they do in a perfect setting, right? If the FBI, the NSA, the CIA, the state police of Massachusetts, and the Boston police, elite unit come in and throw all their resources into something, you are going to have much more than any true crime podcaster sitting in their attic is going to be able to throw at a case, right? But overwhelmingly, that's not true, right? A lot of cases happen in districts that have few police. Like, I think going back to the most famous case for you guys, the Mora murder case, I think there was like one police officer or one deputy sheriff. I forgot what the title was, but there was only one or two people on duty that night, right? For a relatively large area. Texas, you have counties in Texas where not quite the whole state of Massachusetts, but gigantic counties with maybe a couple dozen people on duty for thousands of miles. So you have a lot of places where there's simply not enough police. There's not enough police in different categories, like they may not have a murder very often. In Boulder, that was very much the case, where they just didn't have much experience with a murder. They were a very wealthy police department. You could argue per capita, again, one of the wealthiest in the country, but they simply didn't have the people who had decades of experience, like, say, a detective in Baltimore for solving murders. So the professionals often are handicapped and don't have the resources, people or otherwise, that we think we do, that we think they should, because of the stereotype of media. And so it is quite possible that an amateur in their attic who has the time and has access to information can look at things and ask questions that simply nobody in professional law enforcement has had time or inclination or equipment to do. So I don't want to get into this. When you say amateur sleuths, you make it sound like was said in this article, they're all silly, and inconsequential as opposed to the professionals who are always right and have everything at their disposal and are always following exact procedure. But that's not simply the case in real life.
So with that being said, what does separate the individual from a amateur sleuth and a professional sleuth if they're not associated with law enforcement?
Well, that's a really good question, because I'm old enough to remember when there was a professional division in journalism. And I'm talking about 80s through early 90s. There was still the tradition that you were a journalist if you were paid full-time from a news organization, or maybe you were a stringer paid part-time from a news organization to collect news and report news, and then it came back through an industrial setting like a newspaper, a magazine, television. And there were independent content creators. I remember I was in a certain hobby, and I got newsletters that some guy printed at his office or printed in his basement on mimeograph, or had access to a copier. There were online fora, right, where people argued about Metallica, or I think probably you could find. I'd really like to see what the first true crime, before podcasts, but on the bulletin boards. I'm sure there were discussions of the JonBenet Ramsey case real time then on bulletin boards. So there always was a small independent content creator class. Now we have a situation where the industrial media has really taken a hit. I mean, you see how I saw an old episode of Cheers last night, very Boston show, right? An iconic Boston show. And in the episode, Sam Malone, the bartender, is having an affair with a city council person who's played by the captain of Star Trek Voyager, across there. And she's giving a little impromptu press conference at the bar, and there's like 7 different newspapers: Boston Sentinel, Boston this, Boston that. Well, newspaper, there used to be 7 or 8 papers, and now Boston probably, this Boston Globe still publishes, right? I mean, there's maybe 1 paper in a town, just a few TV news stations, but there's millions of independent content creators, and some of them are getting 100 million downloads. Now, most of them are getting 50 downloads, but 100,000, 200,000 is not unusual. And so they are, especially in terms of local media or national stories, they're being more influencers, more influential than traditional legacy media, or they're driving the agenda of legacy media. If you have the Gabby Petito case from a couple of years back, right? The frenzy, I don't know if anybody studied this, but I think the frenzy came from national media, but from independent social media at the same time, and sort of built off each other, so that you had entire Reddits, which still exist, Reddit Gabby Petito, and how many times has that been done on podcasts? So you have this new dominant independent media that are powerful. And you may have communities where there's news deserts, where they're literally, there's the newspaper is gone. There's hardly any radio news anymore. There may be a couple of television stations. But if you want true crime news in a lot of communities, a podcast may be the only place you're going to get it. You're not going to get it from the old standards.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. Also, in this article, I thought it was interesting that there was someone, one of these amateur sleuths that we're talking about, who has social media accounts and things like that. They filmed the police pulling the body of a person out of water, a deceased person. Now, I guess my question is there anything newsworthy filming the police pulling the body of a person who died accidentally or intentionally out of the water?
Well, in the old days of industrial news, there were certain rules about that, and there was often discussion about showing bodies, right? So, for example, it was quite common that you would have a picture on the front page of the Boston Globe if there was a murder or a car accident of a body, police are surrounding a body covered by a tarpaulin, and you see the outline of the body. But then if you go back, you will also see and part of the decision making was who is the body. Okay, if it was a child, if it was a perceived innocent, I'm putting finger bunnies up here, innocent person, it was much less likely that you were going to see a body. If it was a gangland shooting, it was much more likely that they were just going to go ahead and show a body because it was perceived that these weren't like innocent victims, and it was more newsworthy, the view of them being killed, because it was unusual, that they might be killed in a restaurant, with the Godfather style, with the napkin still around their neck or something like that. So the rules of news, the visual ethics of news had certain components to it. Now, of course, everybody is their own ethics czar, right? Everybody is their own editor. And so everybody makes their own decision. Now, there are master editors, YouTube. If you go on YouTube and you watch World War II documentaries, the people who are reposting those World War II documentaries have to blur out the bodies of German soldiers or Japanese soldiers because YouTube does not want to show bodies, and you are in danger of having your channel demonetized or banned if you show bodies. You sometimes in TikTok, you have to say unalived, right? You have to use certain language. So there is a level of censorship that's going on depending on the platform, the carrier. So we haven't moved too far away from there being somebody besides an individual making those decisions. There was a famous case many years ago, and I'm blanking on the circumstances, but there were some kids who drowned. This is in the 50s, I think, 60s, I think, who drowned. And there was an argument because some papers printed a picture of the drowned child. And the reason they said they did this is because this is an area where there were signs, do not swim here, right? It was like a current, a lake, a river. I forgot the exact circumstances. And the newspaper's argument was, we want to warn families and kids, this is serious. You're taking your life if you go there. So the greater good argument, that's usually in ethics, one of the arguments is greater good, like something that does some harm that causes greater good. So I would have to ask that creator, what greater good does it create to show that or not? And you've gone through this, you've discussed this yourselves about discussing some circumstances of crimes. You've had these discussions on your show before.
Yeah.
Actually, I'd like to know, maybe I'm sure your audience would like to know, I'm sure you mentioned it before, but what are your standards? It used to be called standards. It still is, at CBS News, standards and practices. You could show, certain parts of the body, but not other parts of the body and so on. What are your standards and practices?
Very low.
Well, I would say we haven't ever filmed anything like that. But one of the reasons I asked was because I know that one of the Boston papers that we were just talking about did that back in the 90s. The exact same thing with Charles Stewart when they pulled him out of the water after jumping off the Tobin. Not much difference that long ago.
Well, hold on to that thought, though. I just want to piggyback on that because in the same case, they also released the initial picture of Carol Stewart murdered in the car.
Way worse.
Yeah. And that's to Dr. Perlmutter's point that they were trying to showcase this horrific gangland shooting, right? This not gangland shooting, but in the black neighborhood shooting. That's what they wanted to really shine the light on with that picture. And I'm still curious why they wanted to do that with them pulling Charles Stewart's body out of the water, because that just seems sort of if it bleeds, it leads stuff. Yeah, well, that's why I asked is if it's newsworthy, because it's going to happen, it seems like. And to answer your question, Dr. Perlmutter, about our own standards there, we haven't filmed stuff like that, so we can't really speak on that. But we have had photographs of crime scenes that were given to us by law enforcement who work in that case, and we obviously didn't
share the things that they asked us not to share. But they showed us a lot of those photos and even gave us copies of them because of the work we were doing. We were trying to help assist them. And so, we never shared those anywhere publicly. We did maybe speak about them a little bit, but that was it.
Yeah. I think, so going back to something you said there, again, maybe as I age out, I remember things which people today make it sound like it's some crazy new trend or something like that. Going back to something you said, if it bleeds, it leads. There was always a critique, especially of television news, that they went for sensational violence. Film at 11 was the phrase. And I think I have to explain to the millennial and Gen Z audience what that means. Typically a local newscast was at 5 o'clock. And then the national newscast would be at 6 or 6:30. But then there would be an 11 o'clock broadcast again of the local news. And so they wanted to push their best video, their best film before that. And often that was action, and often that was crime. I mean, if you lived in California, I had a friend who lived there, and I stayed with him a couple of times, many years. And 5 o'clock every day, there was a police chase on the Santa Monica freeway. I mean, OJ was just one of thousands of police chases on the Santa Monica freeway or other freeways there. And what is the news value of watching a car running away from police? I mean, do we learn anything about the human condition, or make our world any better? No, it's just good visuals, right?
Yeah, we want to see how it ends.
Yeah. Well, I remember in this case, and I forgot whether I talked about the show before, the person who was running away was in a delivery van, and it had a huge phone number for Lance's Plumbing, call 3019, and a phone number. And I'm going, this poor guy, Lance, is getting these phone calls saying, "Hey, did you know yeah, I know my truck is out there. It's my stupid delivery guy." Ran away from the police. But so the if it bleeds, it leads. Probably the most famous case of this, and I wonder, have you done this, or this might be a good show for you guys, but have you ever done the Christine Chubbuck case? It's really what came during the heyday. Christine Chubbuck was the first suicide on television, live on television. She was and there was two movies made about this not that long ago. One of them, Christine, and she was in Florida. She was a newswoman on a television station there. She had reporting from the scene and also from the studio. And she committed suicide on air. First time that ever, this is 1974. And, there's speculation she had some mental health issues. She had some things going wrong in her life. But she specifically, before she killed herself, she said, I'm doing this because this is what the news is nowadays. So it was, in some extent, it was a protest against that. The movie Christine about her is an excellent, excellent movie, and it shows the actual event. And it was, as you might imagine, it was pretty shocking. Well, that was a big deal in 1974. That had television news become too violent and showing too many horrible things happening to us. A lot of people, including within the news industry, were very uncomfortable. So again, I hesitate to say these crazy TikTokers are, creating something which was a problem in 1974 with industrial news. We've always had this issue.
Yeah, and now there's such a thing as what do you feel about doom scrolling when your news feed is just nonstop bad news? You can go through the news feed and every single write-up, every article, every headline is just something awful. There are good things that you can report on in the news, and you have to search for them.
Right. There's some colleagues of mine here at Texas Tech that got some big attention just a couple of years ago. I think I mentioned them last time, that they found that news is bad for your health. If you watch news too much, your mental health deteriorates. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but yeah, if you just sit there and scroll through, and places like Reddit, of course, if you pay the subscription, you can have a tailored feed and nothing that is outside that feed appear. So you could see, doom and gloom, combat footage, watch people die, watch people, just you could spend hours a day watching cats, or you could spend hours a day watching our world fall apart. And it is very easy to become depressed if you're just watching nothing but the violence and horror of our world. There's a lot of it, but should that be the only thing that you're watching? I would not recommend that. Balance your true crime listening. I mean, listen to your show, but don't listen to 50 true crime shows. There's something wrong with you if you're listening to 50 true crime shows.
Yeah, take a breather with some cat videos.
Yeah. Mix in some cats. They're really crazy. What about the trend of YouTubers and influencers getting arrested for I guess getting too close or somehow interfering with investigations?
Yeah, of course, this is probably the one YouTube trend or TikTok, Instagram trend that we can agree has no redeeming value whatsoever, and I have no problem saying there's something wrong with these people and they shouldn't be doing this. And we've had two very famous cases recently where people, I call it, malicious pranking. Again, there is a history. I'm old enough to remember Candid Camera, which was a show which would prank people, and like they go to a bank teller machine and it starts blowing out lots of money, and you're filming them secretly, and what are they going to do? Ha ha ha. And it was cute. They never really did anything where somebody felt that they were a threat of life. And then the evolution of that show, there was a funnier, even funnier version where they pranked the stars, like Johnny Carson or Ernest Borgnine or of the time. And then I think the most recent incarnation, I don't know whether MTV has that show Punked, where I think they prank sort of younger music and TV film stars. So there's always been a tradition of the practical joke. You go back in time long enough. There's a really great horror short story by Edgar Allan Poe, which I recommend to everybody who's a true crime fan, called Hop Frog, HOP-frog. It's actually probably based on a medieval story, but it's this horrifying case of a king who pulls a prank and everything goes wrong. Let's put it that way. It would make the news today. Well, anyway, so now we have these TikTokers and YouTubers who, in order to get karma, and in order to get downloads, and are going up to people. And they're not like, surprise, hey, did you leave that $100 bill? They're saying, here, I have video of you, attacking children, or here, like threatening them or scaring them or entering their house, which in Texas is not a very smart move. Anything south of the Mason-Dixon line, entering somebody's house without permission will not end well.
We're talking about these pranks and the prank shows, and I just recently read an article that featured Steve-O from the Jackass crew.
Yeah.
And it's a really eye-opening moment when Steve-O is hypercritical of kids with
He's
their
the
pranks
old guy
today.
now, wagging his finger.
Yes.
He was talking about as reckless and irresponsible as it looked on screen when they were doing these jackass pranks. He said that the time that went into making sure it could be as safe as possible and as organized and, I guess, strategically arranged as possible. No one really looks at that part of it, and all they see is the result. And that's what kids are sort of taking nowadays with these pranks. But at the same time, that's sort of hypocritical. Because, he's been sober for 16 years and publicly has said half the time he was doing those things, he was like high or wasted out of his mind. So did you really set everything up to be as safe as possible, or are you just sort of putting icing on this to make it seem like it's not your responsibility for what's happening today? I have no real opinion on it. I'm just curious what you think.
Well, I noticed at the time, and again, I guess I'm a living fossil that I watched those shows live purely for research purposes, by the way, not because I enjoyed them.
Of course.
But they would always have a pretty heavy duty warning saying, this is set up by trained professionals in a closed, situation, do not try this at home. And there would always be these stories of some high school kid who decided to, rollerblade off the building or something because he saw it. So that's always an issue. But these are people who are intentionally setting up potentially dangerous, even fatal situations. And we have 2 cases recently of them being shot by somebody. And the video exists of one of these guys going up to some poor Uber Eats guy who's picking up some food, and this TikToker goes up and says, "Here, I don't even want to mention, but something horrible. I've got a video of you." And he keeps getting in this guy's face, violating his personal space, getting closer. And there's a big size difference. The TikToker, I think, was like 6'4", and there's a little guy. And the little guy pulled out a gun and shot him, and of course the TikToker survived, but, and I don't think he felt apologetic or he was really happy with the views or something. I don't know what the end game there was, but obviously that is the worst kind of, and the other part about this that really worries me, again, is the copycatting of people, just again, some high school kid who decides to go do this at the mall because they saw it and somebody got 1 million views. I'm really confused how the channels, the carriers, are allowing this content to get out in the first place, like not banning these people for life from social media, which I think should be more common, people being banned for life from YouTube or
Yeah, I wonder how that works, like the logistics of that. I remember we covered a documentary where a guy was banned from the internet, and I just how do you actually enforce that? But it occurred to me during your answer there, how many influencers would willingly take a bullet for more views?
I'm worried that there's a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
We have now, I think popularity has become the new arbiter of worth. You go back in time far enough, and your blue blood, your nobility was an arbiter of how much you were worth or worthy as a person, or your status in society. And then wealth became that, fame. But now, we're in the era of fame, right? And Andy Warhol's famous comment about in the future, everybody will be famous for 15 minutes. Well, now it is possible for anybody to be famous for 15 minutes if you're willing to go to the lengths. You can create really good content month after month after month, like you guys, except during your mysterious disappearance, which we'll talk about later. Or you can, I guess, go up to somebody in the mall and provoke them to shoot you. I personally would choose option number 1, just working on creating good content month after month. But let's face it, there's a lot of people today, it's easily done. It's easily accessible.
It's skipping the line too. It's skipping the hard work of it. And, you're kind of getting attention for doing something outlandish, in a sense.
Am I going to lose a body part, though? Am I going to lose a body part or have any sort of significant ramifications down the line if I get shot?
Well, yeah, you are. And again, if you just, I wouldn't suggest spending too much time on it, but if you go on the different Reddits like instant regret or, there was an attempt or something like that, you're seeing people all over the world, by the way, in case anybody thinks this is just a North American or, Western Hemisphere phenomenon. This is like Taiwan and Thailand and Tanzania. Young people are, filming themselves standing next to a train and losing an arm. There's I won't say it's a significant number of people, but it's people who, I'm sorry that they decided that karma or likes or downloads was going to cost them parts of their body, but it has, yes.
That's like the plot of like a Cronenberg movie. People who want to increase their worth by becoming more and more popular for grotesque and creative ways to lose body parts.
Well, this is the era that we're in. In some countries like China, you get a social credit score. You get a score the government gives you a score, and it affects their. There was a recent series, I think it was called Uploaded. I didn't watch more than the first season, but it projected a near future where, like, when people die, if you pay enough money, you can be uploaded and live forever, and like Matrix type of situation. But in there, the like we always joke about, leave me a good Yelp review, right? But like in there, everybody gets to Yelp review. Everybody gets to review everybody else. So like, if you and I are friends, I rate you as 1 to 5 in your friendship, and like, yeah, but I called him once and he was too busy to see me. Or intimate relationships, or everybody's rating everybody, and everybody travels around. You can just point your phone at somebody and you see their score. And I think we're so close to that it's one of those things that's almost already there in terms of people checking each other out. Certainly, if you're applying for a job, they are asking for your social media history. Some employers are asking for your passwords. They want to see what you've posted. You want to get a book published, it's really better to say, hey, by the way, I have 100,000 followers. That media begets media, right? Following begets following. If you guys want to do the, definitive Dark Valley book, or whatever your mysteries, your book, that you already have an audience, helps, right? So we're in that world now. So I'm not surprised that some 17-year-old thinks that it's the best thing possible to create likes and downloads by risking their life or somebody else's life.
Right. And I've seen this sort of perpetrated just with words too, and like, Instagram posts or whatnot. Someone will post something controversial, and I'm typically talking about like a sports take or something. Someone will say, Larry Johnson, best basketball player of all time. Tell us why we're wrong, and you'll have 100,000 comments saying whoever posted this is an idiot. Michael Jordan's the best ever, but that's the purpose, because more people will see it, more people will comment, and it perpetrates itself.
That is a very important point, is that, the dead internet theory? Have you talked about this before in the show? No. It's a crime mystery, which is this in its extreme form. It's the idea that there actually is no internet anymore, that it's all bots talking to other bots, right? And in this era of AI, that is a serious danger. I mean, right now we have entire governments, certain foreign countries that are producing. There was just a story today that a certain major power next to Ukraine is producing, hundreds of thousands of stories to plant in Western press, because the AI can do that, of course, now, and a lot of content you see feels like it's AI, if it isn't AI. And so we're being flooded with a lot of content, and of course, building up karma is like a snowball rolling down a hill. And I see that all the time, is that people will post something not because they believe it, but because they just want to provoke. It's rage bait, right? And that contributes nothing to discourse. Again, this is why I enjoy talking to folks like you all who curate, who spend a lot of time thinking about their content and preparing and studying, doing the research, and then trying to have content that edifies, educates, we learn something from, we take away more than our first encounter. But I am worried that the rage bait is, that's what people respond to. In fact, it doesn't seem to be a way to turn that off. Somebody posts on Reddit Star Trek, Kirk was the worst captain except for Picard. I'm not a massive Star Trek fan, but what does that add to the discourse? I mean, what, there's no possibility that anybody's going to say anything new or interesting, even if you are a Star Trek fan, in that discussion, which will probably have 2,000 comments, right? Yeah.
If that's what gives us 2,000 comments, and we're going to definitely shift this show to be Star Trek centric. And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
I am curious what your thoughts are on how much damage the term fake news has had on the media.
Well, as we've talked about before, the death of news media is a murder-suicide pact. I mean, we do it to ourselves as much as outside forces are doing it to us. In fact, there's sort of a spiral of collaboration. I am very unhappy at big news and how I feel ethical standards have dropped, standards of accuracy have dropped, standards of waiting to run with a story until they know more have dropped, lack of context. So that somebody is adding to that by, as we have entire governments creating actual fake news product, and then we have people probably over accusing non-fake news of being fake news. It's like a big boiling mess. And I'm not going to blame any one ingredient of this big boiling mess more than others, because the accusation of fake news wouldn't resonate so much if it weren't true some of the time. And I just think we're not doing a very good job nowadays of covering big, complicated, especially when a story has any complexity. Or let's go back to true crime. We have a lot of we've always had trouble, and we've talked about this on the show before. We've always had trouble covering breaking news. Famously, journalism has been called the first draft of history. I've been studying that first draft for 30 years. It's always wrong. The first draft is always wrong. There's always mistakes. And then those mistakes create plot holes, basically, that people who are conspiracy minded or who are denialist minded will then, anomaly hunt. School shootings are a very good example of this. There'll be some initial reporting. There were 3 shooters. No, there were 2. It turns out there was 1 shooter. Well, people aren't very good at hearing, which gun from another, or they heard one shot came from somewhere. You see that now. I mean, it used to be at least a couple of days before the conspiracy theories start. I saw for the Russian terrible massacre in the music hall, city hall there in Moscow, the conspiracy theories were occurring like live. There wasn't even the slightest delay, for, say, the 1963 John F. Kennedy shot, and then slowly, conspiracy theories start to develop over time. But of course, nowadays, our mistrust in media and our mistrust in government is often well placed. So I can't blame people for placing it.
Yeah, Kate Middleton is something that comes to mind on this topic because, there was a photo that was apparently edited that was released by the royal family, and people jumped all over it and pointing out the edits, and there's something wrong here, and a lot of people going too far with their sort of feelings on what they thought was really going on. But kind of surprisingly, people were right in that something was going on, not what they really thought, probably, but interestingly enough, there was something.
Yeah, the generative visual AI is fascinating. And actually, this is my newest topic of research. And we just finished a great paper with a colleague who actually works as a chat prompt engineer. And we are just now, I don't know if you've seen the latest product of Midjourney, which is one of the AI visual programs. And it's photorealistic. It's really close. I think I can tell that it's not a real picture of a real scene, but it's so close that, and now there's a phenomenon, actually social media is part of this, is that I think your generation, millennials and the Gen Z generation are a little bit more, I won't use an old word, hip, but you're a little bit more aware there is such a thing as AI and like, does this picture look real or not? But my generation is a little bit behind that. So there's this interesting phenomenon of people posting on Facebook, which, skews older, these pictures, which to somebody who studies it or somebody like you who studies it but also is younger, you immediately go, wait a minute, that's not a real picture. But these get like 100,000 likes saying, oh my gosh, that's the most beautiful picture of a kitten and a puppy cuddling I've ever seen. And so they're getting all these karma points, they're getting all these Facebook likes, but they're nowhere are they saying this is a fake picture. This is an imagined world. And so, we're entering now the end of visual truth, because once we get to this point where any video or any photograph of anything can be created, Tim, that picture of you and Putin, going on vacation together, hunting, bear in the Siberia, looked real to me.
Shirtless too.
Yeah. I think we have to say that's not true. You know what? Because people will take away. I admit I made that up. I lied.
Well, thank you for coming clean.
It's already on the internet.
This has been my favorite conversation with you yet, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm not even here. This is not actually me.
It's not even us. We're still missing.
Well, this is this interesting world now where we're going to have unlimited bot power, unlimited AI power. Although the unlimited power, did you see there was I'm sorry for going off on a tangent, but there was an interview with Sam Altman, the head of ChatGPT. And that uses a tremendous amount of actual power, like electricity. And he was saying that they're going to have to use fusion reactors to power the AI in the future because it uses so much energy. I thought that was interesting. That, again, we're getting more matrixy as we go along there. But I think going back to the very beginning of this discussion, it all comes down to personal responsibility for creators, and it all comes down to audiences holding people accountable. And saying that, I'm not going to give likes or, follow content that isn't created ethically. And we just hope we can train audiences to care about that.
Well said. Well said. I have one more question for you, and it's just been nagging at me the entire conversation, and I'm dying to know how that episode of Cheers ended.
Yes. Kate Mulgrew was the actress, by the way, who played the captain in Star Trek Voyager, and she, the answer is I do not know, because it was the end of season 4, cliffhanger of what will hang. So I will next. We bought 2 seasons, so I will find out. So I don't know. I guess I'll have to be on the show again to tell you how a 19
come back again
show ended.
Yeah.
Don't tell me. Yeah.
All right, Dr. David Perlmutter, thank you so much for joining us here today on the show. We really appreciate your time, and this conversation was totally fascinating.
And terrifying.
I hope it's both for all of us. And again, thank you so much for what you do and your consistent hard work to make the content interesting, educational, and thoughtful. I appreciate it.